The twin suns burned down on a broken warrior, abandoned and left to die by his own people. His body, battered and weak, could barely move as scavengers closed in. But just when all seemed lost, a shot rang out, and the beasts dropped dead. A human, an enemy, stood in the distance, offering him water, saving his life. Now, with danger closing in from all sides, the two unlikely allies must fight their way through the ruins of a dying world. Betrayal, survival, and a deadly choice await. Will they make it out alive? Or will they be crushed by the very forces that abandoned them? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Commander Ryland lay in the ruins of the battlefield, his body aching and battered from the battle that had raged only hours earlier. The twin suns of the dying world above him blazed harshly, casting an orange glow over the cracked earth. The heat shimmered in the air, making the ground feel even more inhospitable. His once proud armor, designed to protect him in the fiercest of wars, was now dented, broken, and covered in dust. It was a mockery of the warrior he had once been. His breaths were slow and shallow, each one coming with difficulty. Pain radiated through his body, but he forced himself to remain still. If he moved too quickly, his body might give out entirely. His vision blurred at the edges, and a dark haze threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. He was dying. Abandoned, forgotten, left for dead. Ryland's mind raced with thoughts of betrayal. He had fought for the Vorian Empire all his life. He had led soldiers into battle, won victories, and helped expand the Empire's reach across the galaxy. And now, in his moment of weakness, they had left him behind. The Vorian Empire did not waste resources on the weak. Warriors like him, those who could no longer stand, were considered expendable. As the warships flew away, not one of them had bothered to check for survivors. No one cared that he was still breathing, still alive in the midst of a dying world. To them, he was nothing more than a discarded tool, no longer of use. He had been left behind like an old broken weapon, abandoned to rot in the wasteland. The wind howled through the ruins around him, carrying with it the scent of smoke and the remnants of destruction. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of war, now lay silent. There were no more gunshots, no more shouts of soldiers, no more clashes of metal. Only the eerie quiet of death remained. Yet, Ryland was not truly alone. Something moved in, the distance. His heart raced and his instincts screamed at him to act, to fight, to survive. But his body was too weak. He could barely lift his arm, let alone his weapon. He tried to reach for his rifle, but his fingers were stiff, trembling. With a final, desperate effort, he stretched out his hand, trying to grab the rifle that lay just out of reach. He cursed under his breath, frustrated by his helplessness. Just a little more and he could defend himself. Just a little more, and he might have a chance to survive. But the scavengers were closing in, their growls filling the air. Four-legged creatures with matted fur, their yellow eyes glowing in the dim light. They had come to feast on the dead, to pick through the remains of battle, and Ryland was their next target. He could feel their eyes on him, smell the hunger in the air. The creatures were getting closer, their movements quick and sure. His rifle lay just a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. His fingers were numb, his strength gone. He would not be able to reach it in time. The largest of the scavengers leapt forward, its jaws snapping open. The sound of a gunshot rang out, deafening in the stillness of the wasteland. The beast jerked backward, a smoking hole in its skull, before crashing to the ground. Its body hit the earth with a heavy thud, sending up a cloud of dust. The other scavengers froze, their yellow eyes now filled with fear. Another shot rang out, and then another. The remaining creatures scattered, yelping in fear as they retreated into the ruins. Silence returned, broken only by the soft hum of the wind. Ryland lay still, his breathing erratic, his chest rising and falling with each strained gasp. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog in his mind. Who had fired those shots? Who had saved him from the scavengers? His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the gunfire. And then he saw him. A lone figure stepped forward from the shadows, his movements purposeful. The man was tall, his armor ragged and patched with different materials. His weapon was old but well maintained, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He wore a helmet that covered part of his face, but Ryland could see his eyes. Sharp, calculating, focused. He was human. Ryland's mind raced. Humans. The Vorian Empire had long since crushed them, deemed them weak and primitive. Their technology was outdated, their bodies frail, and their empire was nothing compared to the might of the Vorians. And yet here stood a human, strong and alive in a way Ryland could not comprehend. The human lowered his rifle, his gaze never leaving Ryland. He studied the fallen commander for a long moment, before breaking the silence. "You look like hell," the human muttered, his voice rough but not mocking. Ryland frowned, too weak to respond. His pride, his warrior's instinct, screamed at him to reject the help. But the pain in his throat was unbearable, and his body could no longer withstand the harsh conditions of the dying world. His hands shook as he lifted them, weakly reaching for the water the human offered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The human simply watched him, waiting for Ryland to make the decision. The water canister felt cool against his hand, a small but vital comfort in a world that had offered him nothing but death. Finally, Ryland took a long drink, feeling the cool liquid slide down his throat. For the first time in hours, his mind cleared. He could think again. The human had saved him, but why? "Who are you?" Ryland's voice was barely more than a whisper. The human sat down on a nearby rock, wiping sweat from his brow. He glanced over at Ryland, his expression unreadable. "Name's Liam," he said simply. Ryland studied him. There was something about Liam's calm demeanor, his confidence, that unsettled him. The man's eyes were sharp like those of a soldier. And yet he was human, and humans were supposed to be weak, fragile. At least, that's what Ryland had been taught. "You were left behind," Ryland said, his words coming slowly as he tried to make sense of the situation. Liam gave a dry chuckle. "Looks that way," he said, his tone devoid of bitterness. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, checked it, then stuffed it back inside. "Not the first time. Probably won't be the last." Ryland frowned, his thoughts racing. The human had been left behind just like him. But why hadn't he simply walked away? Why had he saved him, a member of an empire that had long since deemed humans worthless? The question burned in Ryland's mind, but he did not ask. Instead, he watched as Liam stood and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "You're lucky I came by," Liam said, turning to leave. Ryland hesitated. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Liam stopped and turned back, his gaze steady. "Because you'd be vulture food by now." The words stung, but Ryland did not argue. He clenched his fists, unwilling to show weakness. Yet, as Liam began to walk away, something inside Ryland stirred. He could not let this human leave him. Not. "Now, wait," he said, his voice raw. Liam stopped, turned, and waited. Ryland swallowed his pride. "You saved my life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam shrugged, his expression unchanged. "Yeah, well, didn't feel like watching a guy get eaten today." Ryland was silent for a long moment. Then with great effort he spoke again. "I need help." Liam looked at him, considering the words carefully. After a long pause, he sighed. "All right, big guy, let's get you moving." And with that, the two unlikely companions began their journey across the wasteland, bound by the shared experience of survival, and the question that still lingered in Ryland's mind. Why had this human saved him? Ryland lay still on the cracked earth, his breathing shallow and uneven. His muscles ached with every movement, his body still reeling from the brutal battle that had left him broken and abandoned. The heat of the twin suns above him only worsened the pain, but it was the silence around him that weighed the heaviest. The world seemed to have forgotten him. His people, the Vorian Empire, had flown away, leaving him to die alone in the ruins of a lost battlefield. Yet, as the minutes stretched into hours, a strange sensation crept over him. He wasn't entirely alone. There was something or someone out there moving in the distance. The faintest sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoed through the silence. His heart began to pound in his chest as his instincts flared. Something wasn't right. Ryland's hand twitched, fingers desperate to grab his weapon, but his strength was gone. The rifle, which had always been his ally in the heat of battle, now lay just out of reach, mocking him with its proximity. His body betrayed him, muscles screaming in protest as he tried to drag himself forward, inch by agonizing inch. But the scavengers were close now. He could hear them. Low growls, the sound of claws scraping against the ground. They were circling, closing in, hungry, ready to feast. The air around him seemed to freeze. The scavengers were almost upon him, and he was too weak to fight back. Just as he thought his fate was sealed, a gunshot rang through the air. The sound was sharp and clear, breaking the tension that had settled over the battlefield. The largest of the scavengers jerked backward. A bullet lodged in its skull. It collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, its body crumpling into the dust. The other scavengers hesitated, their eyes wide with fear. Then another shot rang out, and another. One by one, the creatures yelped and scattered, retreating into the ruins like the frightened animals they were. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of death. It was a pause, a breath before the next chapter of Ryland's story. Still struggling to catch his breath, Ryland's eyes darted around, searching for the source of the gunfire. Through the haze of his blurred vision, he saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, with weathered armor patched together from various materials. His rifle, though old, was well-maintained, and he carried it with ease as though it were a part of him. A helmet covered part of his face, but his eyes, the most important part, were sharp and focused, scanning the area. His gaze landed on Ryland, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The figure stepped forward, his movements measured like someone who had been in situations like this before. Ryland's instincts screamed at him to react, to prepare for whatever might come next, but his body simply refused to comply. He was too weak, too broken. He could only watch as the figure lowered his rifle and approached. The man crouched down beside him, his eyes never leaving Ryland's face. "You look like hell," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. The words hit Ryland like a cold bucket of water. He couldn't believe it. He had fought for his people, bled for them, and they had left him to die. Yet here was a human, a species the Vorian Empire had long since crushed, standing over him, not in disdain, but with a calm, almost casual concern. Ryland's mind raced, struggling to make sense of the situation. The Empire had taught him that humans were inferior. Their technology was primitive, their bodies weak. They were a species barely worth conquering. So why was this human here? Why was he standing over him, offering help? Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be gone. And yet, here one was, saving his life. The man didn't wait for a response. Without saying another word, he reached into a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a water canister. He held it out toward Ryland, who hesitated. His pride told him to refuse, to survive on his own, as he had been taught. But his body, aching and parched, screamed for relief. With great effort, he lifted his trembling hand and took the canister from the stranger. The human said nothing, just watched him as he drank. The cool liquid slid down Ryland's throat, a welcome sensation in the harsh heat. For the first time in hours, his mind cleared, his vision sharpened. The fog that had clouded his thoughts lifted, and he could think again. This human had saved him. But why? Ryland's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down on a nearby rock, wiping the sweat from his brow. He glanced over at Ryland, his expression unreadable. "Name's Liam," he said simply, as if that were enough. Ryland studied him, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. The human's name was Liam, and he had saved him. Not out of duty or obligation, but simply because he refused to let him die. That was something Ryland could not understand. He had been raised to believe that strength was everything, that survival depended on fighting, on winning, on conquering. Yet this human, this seemingly weak, insignificant creature, had risked his life to help him, to save him. "You were left behind," Ryland guessed, his voice raw from the effort. Liam gave a dry chuckle, the sound hollow but not bitter. "Looks that way," he said, checking a small device on his belt before stuffing it back into his pack. "Not the first time. Probably won't be the last." Ryland frowned. It didn't make sense. Humans didn't act like this. They didn't leave their own behind, did they? The Vorian Empire valued strength above all else, and those who fell were discarded, left to rot in the desolate corners of the universe. Yet Liam hadn't left him. He had stayed. "Why?" "Your people?" Ryland asked, his voice barely audible. "They didn't come for you." Liam's jaw tightened for a moment, but then he smirked. "Guess they had better things to do." Ryland didn't understand. He couldn't. But there was something about Liam's quiet confidence, the way he carried himself, that made Ryland want to believe him. Humans were supposed to be weak, but this one human was different. The silence stretched between them, thick with questions neither of them asked. Finally, Liam stood slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Well, you're lucky I came by," he said, turning to leave. Ryland felt a strange flutter in his chest. If Liam left, he would die here, abandoned, forgotten. But this human, this stranger, had saved him once. He couldn't let him go. Not now. "Wait," Ryland called out, his voice weak but desperate. Liam stopped and turned, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" Ryland swallowed his pride, his words tasting bitter on his tongue. "You saved my life." Liam shrugged, his expression unchanged. "Yeah, well, didn't feel like watching a guy get eaten today." Ryland nodded, his pride wounded but his heart grateful. "I need help." Liam looked at him for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "All right, big guy, let's get you moving." And with that, the two of them, one human, one Vorian, began their journey across the wasteland, unsure of what the future held, but bound together by the most unlikely of alliances. Ryland was learning, slowly but surely, that survival was about more than just strength. It wasn't about who could fight the hardest or who could stand the longest. It was about trust, and in this wasteland it seemed that trust was a rare and fragile thing. As he walked beside Liam, his body still aching from the battle, he couldn't help but wonder about the human. Why had Liam saved him? Why had he chosen to help someone from the Vorian Empire, a species known for its brutality, its strength, and its cold, unyielding ways? The journey through the ruins was slower than Ryland would have liked. His injuries, though bandaged, still throbbed with every step. The broken battlefield stretched out before them, a landscape littered with twisted wreckage, burned-out vehicles, and the remains of forgotten war machines. The air was thick with dust, and the only sounds were the crunch of their footsteps on the cracked earth and the occasional screech of a distant scavenger creature. Liam led the way, his rifle slung casually. Over his shoulder, his movements fluid and confident. Ryland, on the other hand, felt each step as if it were a battle of its own. His mind was sharp, but his body felt weak, drained of energy. He had fought for so long, led armies and survived impossible odds. But now, with no one to lead him, he felt lost. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so vulnerable. And yet here he was, relying on a human, a creature his empire had discarded as weak, to help him survive. It didn't make sense. "Keep low," Liam whispered suddenly, breaking Ryland from his thoughts. He glanced up to see the human crouching behind a fallen wall, his eyes scanning the horizon. Ryland instinctively dropped to the ground beside him, though he didn't need the warning. His senses were already alert, honed from years of combat. He could hear the distant hum of a drone and his heart skipped a beat. They had been spotted. "They're close," Ryland murmured, his voice low. His hand instinctively went to his weapon, but it was still out of reach, the weight of it haunting him with every passing moment. "The scout, they'll find us." Liam nodded, his jaw set in determination. He didn't speak, but his actions spoke volumes. He pulled a small device from his pack and pressed a button. A faint blue glow pulsed from the device before it, died, leaving a strange sense of unease in its wake. "What was that?" Ryland asked, his voice a whisper. "An MP grenade," Liam replied. "It messes with their sensors for a bit. Buys us some time." Ryland raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. It was a clever trick, one that would give them a few precious moments to hide. And yet, as he crouched behind the ruins, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple survival mission for Liam. There was something more here, something personal. "You've done this before," Ryland said, more to himself than to Liam. Liam glanced over at him, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, more times than I'd like to admit." Ryland couldn't help but wonder what had brought this human to the wasteland. Was he like him, abandoned by his own people, left to survive on his own? Or was there something else driving him? Trust was a dangerous thing to give away in a place like this, and Ryland was starting to realize that his life now depended on it. He needed to trust Liam. But how much? The moment of stillness stretched on as the drone passed overhead, its sensors flickering briefly as the MP grenade disrupted its systems. Ryland held his breath, hoping they wouldn't be detected. Liam's eyes never left the sky, watching the drone until it had flown out of range. When he was certain they were safe, Liam straightened up and gave a small nod. "Let's move." Ryland followed, his body protesting with every step, but he knew he had no choice. They couldn't stay here. If the scouts found them, it would be over. His thoughts turned back to the human beside him. Liam was a survivor. There was no doubt about it. But what did he want from this alliance? Survival? Revenge? Something else entirely? They continued through the ruins, moving quietly, but steadily. Ryland's mind churned with questions, but he kept them to himself. In this world, words were a luxury. Actions spoke louder than any promise or declaration. After a few hours of walking, they came across a small, abandoned shelter. Nothing more than a broken-down bunker hidden beneath the wreckage of an old transport ship. It wasn't much, but it would do. Ryland was about to speak when he saw Liam hesitate, his hand resting on the door of the bunker, listening. "Something's wrong," Liam muttered, scanning the area. Ryland tensed, his hand instinctively, reaching for his rifle. But it was still nowhere in sight, and the helplessness that came with that realization clawed at him. How long could he survive without his weapon? How long before his enemies came? Before he could voice his concerns, Liam grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a nearby pillar. Ryland's heart raced as he crouched low, trying to remain hidden. A moment later, he heard the unmistakable sound of voices. "More scouts," Liam said softly. "We have to move quickly." But just as they were about to make their escape, they were spotted. A shout rang out and a group of soldiers, Vorian scouts, appeared, weapons drawn. They were moving fast, their eyes scanning the area, and Ryland knew they had been found. "We need a plan," Ryland whispered urgently. Liam's eyes flicked to him, a glint of determination in them. "We improvise." Before Ryland could respond, Liam tossed a small piece of debris across the open field, creating a distraction. The scouts turned toward the noise, giving them just enough time to slip into the shadows and avoid detection. "I thought you said you didn't trust me," Ryland said, still in awe of how quickly Liam adapted to the situation. "Never said that," Liam replied with a grin. "Just because I don't trust you doesn't mean I don't trust you." Ryland wasn't sure if he understood, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he might just survive. There was a new, strange sense of camaraderie between them. In a world where everything was a fight for survival, perhaps that was enough. But as they continued through the ruins, moving carefully and silently, Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, not just by the Vorian scouts, but by something much more dangerous: the past and the betrayal that had brought him here. He had been abandoned, left to die by his own people, and now he was running from them, relying on a human to survive. It was a bitter truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face, but there was no going back now. Survival was the only thing that mattered. and the journey, no matter how uncertain, had only just begun. The tension between Ryland and Liam was palpable as they crouched behind the wreckage, their eyes scanning the horizon. The distant hum of engines filled the air, and Ryland could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet. It was the scouts. They were close. Too close. Ryland's mind raced. He had fought in countless battles, faced enemies on every front, and survived the harshest of wars. But this was different. He wasn't fighting for the Vorian Empire anymore. His people had abandoned him, left him to die on this dying world. Now he was fighting for his life with no army to back him and only a human to trust. His chest tightened as he watched Liam. The human was a soldier, yes, but not like any Ryland had ever encountered. Liam fought differently. He didn't rely on superior firepower or brute strength. He used instinct, wit, and whatever he could find. Ryland had always believed that the strongest survived, that it was the warriors who stood their ground and fought with honor who earned their place. But Liam's approach was different. It was raw, unpredictable, and it worked. The scouts were getting closer. Ryland could hear their voices now, low and rough as they searched the area. Liam's hand was steady as he reached for his rifle, his eyes never leaving the approaching danger. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. There was no time for fear, no time for second-guessing. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "What's the plan?" Ryland whispered, his voice barely audible. Liam glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "We fight," he said simply. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. Fight? He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He had always been a soldier, but now, with his body weakened and his weapon lost, he didn't know if he had the strength left to face down the Vorian scouts. They were trained, disciplined, and deadly. He, on the other hand, was just a broken warrior who had been abandoned by his own people. But Liam was already moving. He didn't wait for permission, didn't ask for advice. He simply acted, and Ryland had no choice but to follow. Together they slipped through the wreckage, moving silently, but quickly. The scouts were too close now, and they couldn't risk being spotted. Each step was a gamble, each moment one breath closer to the inevitable confrontation. They reached a crumbled building, its walls half destroyed but still offering some cover. Liam motioned for Ryland to stay low, and they pressed against the walls, their breath shallow as they waited. Ryland's pulse pounded in his ears. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the scouts. But the ruins were eerily quiet, too quiet. Just as he was about to ask Liam what the next move was, the first scout appeared, his silhouette just visible against the faint light of the setting sun. The scout was moving cautiously, scanning the area. Ryland could feel his heartbeat in his throat. This was it, the moment where everything would either fall apart or they would make it out alive. Liam shifted beside him, his rifle raised. Ryland's muscles tensed, and he instinctively reached for the knife at his side. He wasn't used to relying on just a blade, but it would have to do. If they were going to survive, they would need every weapon at their disposal. "Now," Liam muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Without hesitation, he fired. The shot was quick and clean, hitting the scout in the shoulder. The scout stumbled back, falling to the ground with a crash. The rest of the group reacted instantly, raising their weapons, shouting in surprise. "Move!" Liam shouted, and they both sprinted into action. Ryland's legs screamed in protest as he ran, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the ruins, and he could hear the scouts calling out, coordinating their movements. But it didn't matter. They were outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise. They took cover behind a fallen piece of metal, their backs pressed against the wreckage. Ryland could feel the heat of the plasma blasts zipping past them, but he stayed low, waiting for the right moment. His breathing was heavy, but his mind was focused. He had been trained for this. He could do this. Liam's voice broke through the chaos. "Take them down one by one. We can't let them regroup." Ryland nodded, even though Liam couldn't see him. He reached for the knife at his side, gripping it tightly. He was no longer just a broken soldier. He was fighting for his life, and for something more. something he hadn't known he'd been missing until now. Freedom. Freedom from the empire that had abandoned him. Freedom from the rules that had bound him for so long. And for the first time he realized that maybe, just maybe, this human had shown him what it meant to be truly free. The next few minutes were a blur of movement, noise, and chaos. The scouts were relentless, but so were they. Ryland's knife cut through the air, striking down one of the soldiers in a swift, fluid motion. Liam's rifle rang out again, taking down another. They moved like a well-oiled machine, coordinating their strikes, relying on each other's instincts. But there were still more of them, and the sound of reinforcements approaching only made the situation more dire. They couldn't keep fighting forever. Ryland's muscles were burning, his body screaming for rest, but he knew they couldn't afford to stop. "We have to make a run for it," Liam said, his voice steady despite the danger. "The exit's not far. We just need to get through the last of them." Ryland's heart hammered in his chest. Could they really make it? Could he really trust this human enough to follow him, to fight alongside him until the end? There was no time to doubt. No time for hesitation. They had come this far together, and they would finish it together. "Let's go," Ryland said, his voice determined. Together they surged forward, weapons raised, hearts set on survival. The scouts were closing in, but they were ready. They had no choice. It was either fight for freedom or die trying, and for the first time in his life, Ryland didn't mind which fate awaited him, as long as he wasn't alone. They fought with everything they had left, not for an empire, not for a cause, but for themselves. And in that moment, Ryland understood that survival wasn't about honor or strength, it was about trust, and he trusted Liam.